All right. Thank you everyone so much for joining us at our webinar, Living with the Rain. We are here with our wonderful speakers, who I will introduce in a second. My name is Kate Murphy. I'm from the Fraser Basin Council, and Elena Chia, my colleague, is also on the line providing technical support. Just a bit of background, the BC Regional Adaptation Collaborative is bringing this webinar to you today. The BC Regional Adaptation Collaborative supports local governments, First Nations, and industries in integrating climate change adaptation into their planning and decision making. And we also have an online portal for adaptation resources that you can find on retooling.ca. A couple things that you might be interested in, given your interest in climate preparedness. We do have a monthly newsletter, the Retooling newsletter, that sends out adaptation resources, news, and funding opportunities. And we also have all of our recorded webinars online, and this one will be recorded and posted, and the details of that will be sent to all attendees. One quick update, the Adaptation Canada 2020 conference is coming up in February, and the early bird deadline for tickets is December 2nd. So if you'd like to save $75 on your ticket for the conference, please sign up before December 2nd. A couple logistics, please keep your audio muted so that the sound is quite clear for everyone. We're going to have the question period at the end of both presentations, and you can ask questions throughout in the question box that's on your control panel, which you can see on that image. It's a rather old image, but the image of the control panel here. If you'd like to ask any questions verbally, you can also type that into the question box, and then we will ask you to unmute yourself. If you have technical difficulties, please email fraserbasin@gmail.com or type your difficulty into the question box, and Elena will help you out with that. So our great speakers, who we are very happy to have today here, are Andrew Ling and Melina Scholefield. Andrew Ling is the Senior Project Engineer of Utility Analysis and Infrastructure at Metro Vancouver. He has been in professional practice with an emphasis on stormwater management since 2004. He has previously worked in consulting and at the City of Vancouver, and is currently a senior project engineer with Metro Vancouver's Liquid Waste Services Department. At the City of Vancouver, Andrew led several initiatives, including the city's first integrated rainwater management plan, IDF curve rainfall projections, and the elimination of a combined sewer outfall in False Creek. On weekends, he can be found chasing a toddler around Strathcona Park or coaching rowing in Cole Harbour. Thank you so much for being here today. The second speaker, Melina Scholefield, is a professional engineer with over 2 decades of public and private sector experience. Melina is Manager of Green Infrastructure Implementation for the City of Vancouver. She and her team are leading the city's ambitious Rain City strategy, a cross-departmental green rainwater infrastructure and urban rainwater management initiative. Previously, Melina was engaged in the private sector in the field of green buildings, as well as in other roles with the City of Vancouver, where her portfolio included advancing the City of Vancouver Greenest City goals, as well as climate protection, renewable energy, climate change adaptation, and green building programs. Thank you both so much for being here. And Andrew, I will switch it over to you so you can take it from here.
Hey. Okay. Thank you very much, Kate, for that introduction. Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be presenting on Metro Vancouver's Rainfall Projection Project. However, first I would like to acknowledge my colleague Lilian Zaremba, who initiated and steered this project to completion, as well as the rest of the Metro Vancouver team who collaborated on this project. I now have the pleasure to sustain this work by sharing our findings with our professional networks and everyone in the region who works in the field of climate adaptation. First, just a quick overview of the Metro Vancouver region. The region consists of 21 municipalities, 1 Treaty First Nation, and 1 electoral area, and is home to over 2.4 million people. Metro Vancouver is a political body that provides services including drinking water, wastewater treatment, solid waste management, air quality management, regional parks, and regional planning. Metro Vancouver's strategic plans emphasize climate change as a priority. Efforts to understand our region's future climate have been ongoing since the early 2000s. The genesis of the work I'll be presenting today started with the climate projections for Metro Vancouver report published in 2016. That report showed moderate changes in monthly precipitation and significant increases in the intensity of extreme events for a daily duration. Engineers have traditionally assumed that history could be used to tell the future. In many different ways, we used historical data to base designs on. How high was the highest tide? How hot was the hottest day? And what was the most rain that fell on any particular day? Personally, sometime in the early 2000s, I became personally aware of climate change effects on rainfall. But at the time, the profession didn't quite know what to do with them. Early projections couldn't be used in design. There were generalized statements like there will be so much % more annual rainfall, couldn't be directly translated into existing design methods. Engineers who are planning and designing stormwater infrastructure needed to know about shorter events with durations of several hours. They started to ask about future IDF curves, which requires taking climate science to the next level. But in case you're not the design engineer, before I go any further, I should explain IDF curves quickly, in case they're unfamiliar. IDF stands for intensity, duration, and frequency. An IDF curve is essentially a statistical representation of the probability that a rainfall event of a given intensity and duration will occur. These curves are used by engineers for urban drainage design and flood protection, and are very, very common in the industry. And also, staff were also uncomfortable with the uncertainty in the future climate. The fear of not knowing the right number in future rainfall could lead to paralysis and the status quo. But what if all of this perceived uncertainty doesn't have a large effect on our pipes? We designed an innovative study to come up with reasonable bounds for the future IDF curves and to examine the impacts on stormwater and drainage systems through case studies. I'll be presenting those results today. Long story short, history can't necessarily be used to predict the future anymore. The project. The study was completed by GHD consultants out of Kitchener-Waterloo. GHD developed a rigorous methodology to take information from global climate models to create future projections and a new local rainfall data set to create new regional rainfall zones. The methodology considered all various sources of uncertainty in future climate change projections to develop a moderate and a high future scenario. The net result was over 100,000 possible combinations of uncertainty scenarios, different global climate models, emission pathways, downscaling methods, sub-daily scaling factors. All of those netted out to over 100,000 possible combinations. Out of all of those, we selected two sets of results: a moderate scenario that represents a middle of the road or a likely scenario for rainfall, and a high scenario that can be considered a more conservative or worst case. An early deliverable was the new rainfall zones for our region. If any one of you is familiar with our area, it's generally known that rainfall increases from southwest to northeast. We used to consider like rainfall zones using annual rainfall as the common denominator, which saw a fairly smooth southwest to northeast pattern of increasing annual rainfall. Our new zones, which we call homogeneous rainfall zones, zones of like rainfall, volumes aren't necessarily the same in each zone, but the patterns are. And as you can see, the new zones are a bit more, shall we say, blob-like than smooth contours. So, for example, in Zone 1 covers the sort of west half of Metro Vancouver, and Zone 4 is most of Burnaby, and there aren't any smooth lines of delineation like there were with the annual rainfall zones. And this is the best table in case you're looking for future rainfall intensity. This table summarizes the increase in future rainfall intensities. Rainfall intensity will increase in all scenarios. By the 2050s, intensity will increase by 20 to 45%. By 2100, rainfall will be 40 to 75% more intense. Note that the result for the 2050 high scenario, 45%, is very similar to the 2100 moderate scenario, 40%. And a key takeaway is that the climate change is a question of when, not if. Sorry, there's a glitch in the slide. Those are rounded numbers. When, not if, they will occur. We may see these increases within our lifetime, and our children will definitely in their lifetime. We can also, I'll just go back to the slide. We can also look at the changes in terms of frequency of intense rainfall events. This table shows the annual exceedance probability, or AEP. You may be more accustomed to hearing about return periods such as a 1 in 10-year storm, and the profession is moving away from that terminology, but I've listed the return periods for reference. Looking at the top row, the 1 in 5 year event currently has a 20% chance of occurring in any given year. This probability increases to 50 or 60 by the end of the century. This means that an event of the same size could happen 2 or 3 times more frequently in the future. For less frequent events with long return periods, the changes are drastic. Looking at the bottom row, the annual exceedance probability goes from 1% now, 1 in 100, to 10 to 20% by the end of the century, meaning this extreme rainfall event, which is currently very infrequent, could occur 10 to 20 times more often. In terms of return periods, this means that the current 1 in 100 year precipitation event could become the 1 in 6 event by the end of the century. So now I'd just like to break this up. So there's a poll question 1 here that I'd like to take everyone's pulse on.
Okay, so for your benefit, Andrew, 57% of people said, yes, it blows my mind, and 46% said no, because I want to know exactly what will happen and when.
Okay, so I put this in as a bit of a fun question, is that, I've done 2 IDF curve projection studies with 2 different organizations using 2 different methodologies, and to me as a, professionally trained engineer, the climate science and the ability to do what we've done is still staggering to me, that there are models and simulation events and supercomputers that can project climate into the future. Given the complexity of the globe, the Earth, geology, the sun, all those things, and it personally is quite amazing, and I'm really very excited that we can do this work today and start to plan for tomorrow. Just keep moving on here. So we'll just go to the case study. So case study 1 of a combined sewer. In our Glenbrook combined sewer that serves Burnaby and New Westminster. This sewer is located mostly in New Westminster and some in Burnaby, and will be separated by 2070. Each future scenario resulted in flooded manholes, and if we continue to use our present infrastructure as the climate changes, we won't be able to offer the same level of service today. The flooding could be mitigated by upsizing pipes, and the costs right now show the range of the moderate and high scenarios. The incremental costs of choosing the more conservative scenario are around 10 to 15% higher than preparing for the moderate scenario. So the spread and uncertainty isn't as great as some feared. Case study 2. The second case study looked at the Port Moody Coquitlam drainage area, also known as the Chine. This is an escarpment with storm sewers and creeks. Similar to the first study, the climate change results in flooding, and pipes can be upsized to address capacity issues. Again, the difference in cost between the moderate and high scenarios is 10 to 20%. The bigger question here for us is, how do we plan for and fund climate change adaptation, not whether we can predict the exact scenario. We know that flooding can be reduced by adding source controls or green infrastructure like bioswales, impervious pavement, rain gardens, or detention ponds. And we assumed that these green infrastructure measures would be implemented with each property redevelops. Green infrastructure does help reduce the impact of climate change on peak flow, and we should pursue it as much as we can, but it may not be enough to counteract the increase in precipitation due to climate change, or all of the increase. We can't expect to keep the same level of service by relying solely on green infrastructure in the face of climate change, or solely on gray. There's sharing of the load. The third case study on our sanitary system, sanitary sewer I&I, was the Collingwood Sanitary Trunk Sewer in Burnaby, which runs west from Metrotown into Vancouver. The focus was the change in inflow and infiltration, which, if you're not a sewer engineer, is basically leaky sewers with future rainfall increases. Inflow and infiltration enters the sanitary sewer through rainwater and groundwater, which it shouldn't. In addition to climate change, population growth will impact the sanitary sewer capacity. The population in the sewer catchment is projected to more than double by 2100. Population growth alone will challenge the sewer capacity, even with today's rainfall. If the pipes were not upsized just for population growth, but not climate change, capacity would be mostly fine into the 2050s. Sanitary systems are designed with some excess capacity for I&I, which in this case can accommodate the precipitations in the 2050s, but by 2100, climate change-induced increases in I&I will challenge the pipe capacity, and more pipe upsizing will be needed at a cost of $1 to $2 million to account for future climate. So those are our case studies, and just more generally, our projections on climate, may result in more street flooding, basement backups potentially, and the thing is that we are continuing to develop our region with more paving, more roads, more vehicles, and more population. And so what I think, to me, what we're in an environment of is decision-making under deep uncertainty. And this is field of a study, which is acronym is DIMDU, is what we're doing. We're making decisions under a lot of uncertainty. And a challenge for the infrastructure business is the long lifespan and high costs of the things that we do to redo, fix, or upgrade. Sewer infrastructure, for example, can last for over 100 years, and it can cost time and money to redo or dig up again. And engineers have provided the expectation that civil underground infrastructure went in once 100 years ago and then gets replaced 100 years later. This, of course, assumes that loads wouldn't really change over 100 years, and which, of course, we know is not the case. So now that we know what future rainfall could be, we have an idea of what challenges to the system could happen. And we know there may be more flooding, more soggy ground. So I ask, how do we make decisions that will reduce the risk later, sometimes a lot later, and what do we do now? So we can tell you how hard it might rain in the future using these projections, and we could even tell you how big the pipes need to be or how big the rain garden needs to be. But what is the right solution? How robust is that solution? And what happens if we're wrong, and how do the costs get played into this equation? So I compare this to a work process where you might have a process, do the process, make some changes, evaluate it, make a change or two, and then do it again and keep on retweaking. It probably does cost some time and money, but in civil infrastructure, you can't just go back and redo that pipe every time you want to make a tweak. So that's the challenge of this adaptation cycle. And to me, engineers have also given ourselves the burden of getting it right the first time. And can we possibly be right given the uncertainty of the changing climate? And there are no easy answers. There is no easy to follow flow chart with 100% guaranteed outcomes anymore. There is a deep uncertainty to the ability to maintain past or currently expected service levels. And I ask, can we or should we try to maintain existing service levels? And is there a risk to communicating that we can maintain them? The new IDF curves help us assess infrastructure resilience and plan for the future. And at the beginning of the presentation, I said that history will not predict the future, and following on from that, past service levels may not reflect what the future ones will be. For example, the media conversation is always about street flooding, especially at this time of year. And I'm sure to those affected, it is a big, large inconvenience. But would street flooding be considered a poor outcome if rainfall increases 20 to 60%? Water a foot deep and 6 lanes wide on Broadway is water that isn't in the storm sewer or in your basement. Is a soggy grass field in the middle of November a bad thing? It could soak up a lot of water, but we have set expectations that you can play soccer on a dry, almost dry grass field in November, and that somehow by fancy design, a massive volume of water during a rainstorm can be crammed into a bunch of little grates scattered across the urban landscape. Is an expectation of no puddles an important or realistic service level in the future? And are there other aspects of city living that could adapt? Some questions for you to consider. So poll question 2, I'd like to put that up and see how everyone's feeling.
Okay, Andrew, the results were 0% none, keep calm and carry on, 2% a little, 15% some, and 83% yes, of course, the public needs to know what could happen.
Okay, great. That's really good to hear. I think we spend a lot of time discussing the future climate change projections and how big this or that could be, and to me, I think a lot more effort needs to be paid to starting to evolve the public expectations for service in the future. So that's really good to hear. So regional coordination and adaptation planning. So adaptation planning needs to be coordinated between Metro Vancouver and member jurisdictions due to the integrated nature of the sewer and drainage systems. While Metro Vancouver manages 2 drainage areas and provides combined sewers in some municipalities, the majority of stormwater management in the region is the responsibility of our member jurisdictions. We need to consider the system holistically, since upstream inputs have downstream effects. Through official community plans, Metro Vancouver has committed to adapt its infrastructure for climate change, and member municipalities have committed to apply on-site stormwater management. The Climate 2050 strategy currently being developed by Metro Vancouver will further guide collective action towards infrastructure resilience. The information from our study feeds into achieving these commitments. Metro Vancouver and municipal staff are already using these new future IDF curves in planning. Some municipalities are already including the future IDF curves in their bylaw revisions and design requirements. So I'll end here with my daughter, who is currently 2.5, and who, as you heard in the intro, I chase around the park all the time. And the thing is that she will be 83 in 2100. So she'll be alive, she'll be thriving, my family will be around. So I asked, what decisions will we have made that will make her future great, and how can we collaborate and make decisions that will make this world thriving, livable, and safe? Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. That was a wonderful presentation. And as I said before, we'll have questions at the end, so I'll just switch it over to Melina now, and then we can ask you all the questions we're burning to ask you.
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you, Andrew. That was terrific. Really appreciate that overview from Metro Vancouver. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that Vancouver's been pursuing through something called the Rain City Strategy, which is our effort to really reimagine the future of how we manage rainwater in the city in a more holistic and integrated way. So I'll just provide a little bit of a context, and the Rain City Strategy actually just was recently unanimously approved by our council on November the 5th, so we're really excited about that. So I'll provide an overview of what the directions are in the Rain City Strategy. I'll speak a little bit to some of our targets and our next steps. Okay, first polling question. So I'll put it over to Fraser Basin Council there.
That is just up, Melina, and we'll wait for 30 seconds to get the responses.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so the results were 19% extreme rain events and overland flooding, 7% coastal and riverine flooding, 7% increased risk of drought, 7% increased risk of wildfires, and 61% all of the above. Okay,
that's great. I guess like one thing I would just highlight is oftentimes as we've been doing this work around rainwater management, it's been really important to understand that the thinking about rainwater is as much about when there's a lot of water as when there's not enough water, and that's something that often people forget, that things like drought and wildfires, etc., are actually becoming increasingly important issues for both urban and rural areas. Okay, this polling, I don't know, this polling question I actually wanted to do a bit later, so maybe I can skip it for now. Can we come back to that after?
Yep, we definitely can.
Okay, great. Okay, so as we all know, from Vancouver, I'm not sure if our audience is just from British Columbia area, but Vancouver is a city that is very closely connected with water. It basically surrounds our city on 3 sides, and it's a really big part of our community identity. It's even a big part of our culture in Vancouver. I mean, most people here in Vancouver think of ourselves as being citizens that can handle a lot of rain. We still go out and play, we go out and exercise, we go out and enjoy the outdoors, rain or shine, and so it's really a big part of our daily life and living. Vancouver, however, definitely has changed a lot. For millennia, Vancouver has been a temperate rainforest, and the communities that have been living in Vancouver over many thousands of years have lived with and worked closely with the natural systems and the natural water cycle in our community. And of course, through the recent development post-colonization, there's been a lot of change in our watershed. And this is a picture looking actually at False Creek in Vancouver, across at the downtown towards the North Shore Mountains, for any of you who know Vancouver specifically. And this picture was taken in 1893. So you can really see, even in this picture, how the urbanization and urban development has dramatically changed the watershed. You can see in the foreground there's a lot of tree stumps. And so where once water might have fallen on the city and have been absorbed by the ground, have been taken up by plants and trees, or would have flown overland into stream networks that were throughout the city, a lot of that has changed through our urban development to become the city we are today. And you can really start to imagine how the conditions would be different in this exact same outlook. So this is the same outlook, 1893, and this one's 2013, looking at our downtown, exactly the same outlook. So when you think about our city now as being full of buildings of glass, of concrete that go to concrete sidewalks and asphalt roadways, and oftentimes we have underground basements that might be disrupting groundwater flow or infiltration potential, you can imagine that taking care of rainwater and allowing for those natural systems in our city has really changed dramatically. And so there's really a need for us to think differently. So with the Rain City strategy, Vancouver, as a sort of very urbanized, fairly dense community, is starting to challenge ourselves to think differently about a number of imperatives for the future. This focus today is about climate adaptation, and I know our council has adopted the climate emergency, which many communities across the province and the country and internationally have actually done. And we're thinking very intensely about how to adapt and prepare as well as mitigate. Vancouver is a combined sewer city, and so addressing fairly substantial combined sewer overflows in and around our cities and the environmental implications, that is a really important priority for us. And of course, thinking about the relationship between our sewer and drainage system and ecosystem health, and the value of healthy ecosystems in our community for our natural systems, but also as well as how it affects our livability and community, are really important. And then finally, we are continuing to grow. So I know Vancouver's not growing as fast as some other cities within the province, but we do continue to regularly increase the number of people coming into the community. We are continuing to densify, and that presents some very significant challenges for us in terms of servicing infrastructure, especially where we maybe are transitioning from fairly low density single family type housing into multifamily townhouses and high rise developments that have a very different servicing need. And as Andrew mentioned, with a lot of the urbanization that's happening, we're losing a lot of the ground and natural systems that would have otherwise absorbed and managed rainwater naturally. Finally, as with many cities, we have a very significant need to renew and update our assets, and many of them are coming to the end of their life in the next 20 years, and so planning ahead for those very major changes and thinking about how we do it strategically is a big part of what we're trying to do. So as I mentioned before, when we think about climate change within the city, we realize that for many people, how they will experience climate change is actually about either too much or too little water. And I see that Andrew and I have the same snapshot. I'm not sure, Andrew, if that was the same event or not, but it's obviously a common problem location. You can see in this picture, the background is actually our engineering services building. And it's at the intersection of Broadway and Cambie, which are two main arterials in the city. And we pretty much go from high density buildings straight to concrete, sidewalks straight to asphalt. And so when you get these minor rain events, a big sort of cloud burst event that's dropping a lot of water in a short period of time, it's very, very problematic and difficult for our system to handle all of that water. And so we're really looking at how do we create new pathways for water? How do we prepare for the more intense events that are changing in nature? So Andrew mentioned that we are expecting more water overall, but we're also expecting a lot more flashy events. So this picture, there was no weather warning the day that this event happened. There was no Environment Canada weather warning, prepare for extreme event. This was just a really small storm event that opened up in a very localized areas and opened up, dropped a whole lot of rain, and we had the challenges to deal with from that. This actually similar type event happened 2 weeks after this one. So we're expecting there's going to be a lot more of these kind of flashy, peaky events. And so we want to try to prepare our system that's been designed for more moderate and also less intense rain events. We want to start to transition. So as I mentioned, the issues around rainwater are as much about when there's too much water as too little water. And I know many cities globally are actually finding now that experiences around drought and inadequate access to water are becoming a major driver. Recently, we've had some involvement with the City of Amsterdam and a couple of different collaboration initiatives, and the staff in the City of Amsterdam are saying that now actually drought is one of their critical issues that they need to deal with. And so they're looking at how do they preserve water that falls in the wintertime, and how do they preserve water that does fall and make it more accessible to their natural systems and within their city over their dry periods, because they're getting now many months in a row without a single rainfall event. So it's becoming very challenging and problematic for their infrastructure, but also for the health of the natural systems within their city. For Vancouver, we're thinking not just about how to adapt to too much and too little water, but we do have some very significant environmental and water quality issues related to our receiving waters that are linked to our sewer and drainage system. And so for Vancouver, there's really two issues. The first is combined sewer overflows. So many cities across North America and actually globally that were developed around the turn of the century or sooner, they were developed with combined sewers. And that means that the runoff from rooftops and roadways generally is collected into the same pipes that collect stormwater, the sewage from buildings and properties throughout the city. And so when the capacity of the pipe system is exceeded, that overflows into our receiving water. So in Vancouver in 2018, there was a very significant number of combined sewer overflow volume into our receiving water. This is a picture of our Clark Drive outfall, which is one of our most challenging locations. And so this is something really critical that we want to address and prioritize and accelerate our efforts. We've been working for many decades through our sewer separation program to try to address this issue. And we recognize now that we need to really diversify our toolkit and that we need to think about more short-term actions that we can generate to help address this issue, because it's just becoming increasingly challenging with climate change, with increased expectations around protection of water quality, and the interest, for example, of our Tsleil-Waututh First Nation that is leading the Burrard Inlet Action Plan. They have aspirations for having food fisheries in Burrard Inlet, and so looking at pollutant load in these receiving waters and impacts on the ecosystem is really important part of achieving that ambition. The second part of our water quality issue, again, which will be exacerbated by climate change, is around pollutants that are picked up in stormwater. And in this group, there may be people who are very experts, so I may be already telling you things that you already know, but what I just want to highlight that oftentimes people don't recognize actually just how toxic urban rainwater runoff is. And so just to give an example of the kinds of pollutants that are coming off of rooftops and roadways in particular, can be everything from litter to heavy metals, and in particular, actually tire debris. So there's been some really outstanding research happening at the Washington Stormwater Research Center in Washington State, where they've been looking very specifically at the connection between tire wear and impacts on salmon health. And they started to see patterns where actually after rainfall events, a lot of the salmon were being affected and actually having all kinds of health problems, in fact, having mortality rate and mortality pre-spawn, which is very problematic for the health of the species, and that they found a direct connection between tire wear. So, a lot of people may not realize that when they brake their vehicle, the action of braking is generating small metal particulates, copper in particular, The tires are impregnated with zinc, among many other chemicals that are actually wearing down and becoming small debris that's getting picked up in the rainwater. And if it goes into our drainage system unmanaged, all of those pollutants are basically going into our receiving water and are known to have significant impacts on aquatic ecosystem health and fish and salmon in particular. So these are all significant concerns that we need to try to address in our urban environment. Finally, I mentioned before that for Vancouver, a lot of our development of our infrastructure came in the post-war periods where there was a big development boom, and so a lot of the infrastructure went in the 50s and 60s, and so that infrastructure now is coming up around 70, 80 years of lifespan, and so we're going to need to do a lot of renewal. So when we think about the future and all the investments that we need to make to support renewing our infrastructure that's met our needs for the past 100 years, it's now really an opportunity for us to look to the future and saying, okay, well, how do we need to transition and work with those renewal programs to actually develop infrastructure that's going to meet our needs over the next 50, 100 years or more. So green rainwater infrastructure, what is it? Green infrastructure is a very, very broad and versatile toolkit. What it has in common, the many different approaches, is that it uses a combination of engineered systems as well as vegetation and soil ecosystems to actually help manage both the pollutant load and the volume of water that is being managed. So we're trying to mimic the natural pathways for water that would have existed pre-development. So basically allowing water to be absorbed back into the ground, to be absorbed and evaporated into the atmosphere, or evapotranspirated through plants and trees back into the atmosphere, or be harvested and reused. So as I mentioned, it is a very, very diverse toolkit. So we found through our work that sometimes people think only of rain gardens, but it actually takes many, many different forms and can be implemented at many different scales and can have a very high level of performance depending on how much water you want to manage. It can be anything from absorbent landscapes and just the depth of soil that can actually hold water and allow it to both be returned to the ground or evaporate into the atmosphere. It can be rainwater harvesting that basically captures and reuses the water rather than sending it or discharging it into our pipe and drainage system. We've got tree trenches as well as permeable pavements, and then more district scale systems that can take the form of bioswales, wetlands, or building specific solutions such as blue-green roofs that are a step beyond a standard green roof that actually designs in some storage for rainwater and allows for the continuous evaporation of water through the plant ecosystem. So, Rain City strategy, what is it that we're trying to do? So the Rain City strategy, as I mentioned, is a long-term view. So we looked out to 2050 and challenged ourselves to think about how would we reimagine rainwater management and seek a transformation in how we do business to find a much more holistic and integrated approach that better mimics the natural process and yields not only really sound water management services, but also a variety of co-benefits for the community. So our plan has 9 transformative directions, which we like to think of as the big moves that are really setting us on a new course of action for how we deliver water services and how we care for our natural systems and rainwater management in the city, as well as 3 practical action plans that are much more about the pragmatic programs and steps and initiatives that are needed to actually execute on the broader vision. So ultimately, we've got 6 adopted objectives with the Rain City strategy, but I'll just touch on the 2 that are most prominent and are really underpin the entire initiative, and that is we are looking for as many ways as possible to reduce the volume of rainwater entering the pipe system. So we're trying to create new pathways for water, whether it's back into the ground, to be absorbed by plants and trees, or returned to the atmosphere, which is a very effective strategy and very beneficial to the community for a variety of goals around urban heat mitigation, etc. But also we want to try to reduce pollutants in the urban rainwater runoff and reduce the occurrence of combined sewer overflow. So by diverting water from the pipe system, we're helping alleviate that pressure, and we're preserving capacity in the system for climate change, for growth, and also to help address our combined sewer overflow. So Andrew referenced a lot of sort of technical details about return periods and design parameters, et cetera, and these are really, really important, and it's been a big part, I think, of the culture in the engineering and utilities group for a long time to be practicing this. And I think what we've come to realize through the Rain City strategy is that the rainwater management responsibilities and the roles that different people have to play extend far beyond our traditional engineering utility groups. So obviously they continue to play a really critical fundamental role, but we've really recognized that actually to execute successfully on more integrated approaches to rainwater management, including green infrastructure, we actually need people coming to the table from across the organization. So for Vancouver, we've actually had 5 major departments and over 40 branches across the organization who've been actively involved in helping to shape up this initiative and who all have a role to play somehow through their work to help us execute on the vision. And so this is a big part of our work. It's actually been bringing people together and exploring for the people who maybe never thought that rainwater management was actually even one of their responsibilities or a role that they had to play. That they've come to see how critical it is to have all these different people in alignment to help achieve the goals. I've just got the little picture of the street sweeper in there, and it's just one example that like our sanitation teams and operations and our waste management team have been doing street sweeping for many years, oftentimes to, for cleanliness and just sort of like, keeping the city looking attractive and managing sediment loads and leaves, et cetera. But they never really applied it in a way that was going to deal with contaminants generated by vehicles on roadways or sediment that actually might be contributing to clogging in our pipe system or pollutants going into our receiving water. So it really is a chance for them now to work together with us to think about how do we better manage those contaminants at source rather than having them go into our waterways. So I think our sort of foundational recommendation to council, which they adopted, was that we really need a shift that rainwater management and thinking in a more holistic way about water services and green infrastructure and utility services in general needs to be managed at the outset in a variety of major planning initiatives. So whether it's our community planning and land use initiatives, park planning, our transportation corridors, public space planning, or all of our water, sewer, and drainage infrastructure that will continue to be very critical, that we actually need to be thinking about how we address rainwater volume and water quality and how we strive for co-benefits through all those initiatives depending on localized conditions and needs. I won't touch on all of the transformative directions in detail, but they're available in the Rain City strategy if you're interested, but I just would like to highlight a few key things in this concept of striving to become a water-sensitive city is a really big one, where, in the past, it's been very focused on public health and protection of property and large centralized systems, that we want to have a much broader set of objectives now of thinking about intergenerational equity and thinking about how it supports equity and reconciliation with our Indigenous peoples in the community, how we think about health and vitality and livability, and how investments in water infrastructure can yield benefits for multiple objectives. And so thinking about transitioning towards more resilient, adaptable, and decentralized strategies is a big part of the work. And it's for Vancouver anyway, it's a very big transition where we've in the past been focused predominantly on drainage that quickly whisks water away from our public spaces down into our receiving waters. That is very problematic in a climate future where we've got sea level rise, we've got increased pressure on our systems, and coastal flood protection measures that we know will be part of our future solutions. We no longer want to send all that water, at high speed down to these low-lying flood-prone areas. So we want to look now, instead of just sending water away, how do we do more to keep water and manage water close to where it lands? And small actions distributed widely, collectively, have a very big impact, which is Again, it's hard for people to imagine how one small rain garden or one swale or a district scale system serving a neighborhood, how that could possibly be enough to manage all the water. But the idea is that when you have these widely distributed, actually can make a very significant impact. One of our big shifts is we're wanting to move towards a watershed-based approach. And in many communities, especially in Metro Vancouver and in smaller communities that have natural streams, they may already be thinking from a watershed perspective, but Vancouver, unfortunately, over the past 100 years, has buried most of its streams. So many of them are actually in pipes underground. Many of them, in fact, go under buildings. I think there's a big one that actually goes under our engineering department building. And so we need to really think again. We've disrupted the natural water systems, and we've disrupted our understanding, our relationship with water at the watershed scale. And so looking at how we try to restore that and take a watershed perspective and how we plan and execute on both our traditional gray infrastructure as well as our natural systems and our land use and community paths or patterns and systems is really important. For Vancouver, we're really striving to be much more understanding of the equity implications of our decisions and our systems and our approach, and how we can take measures to better support reconciliation with Indigenous peoples who've been, you know, the people that have lived for thousands of years on these lands and lived in harmony with the natural systems as part of a way of life, and thinking about the values around stewardship. And a lot of that has been really disrupted in the recent years. And so we're trying to understand what we can do and how we can better learn from and engage and partner and support objectives that will improve those outcomes. And so again, for Vancouver, the biggest thing for us, I think we've realized that this is not something that we as a government organization can do alone, that it's really about enabling collaboration both within our groups, between sectors, whether it's with universities or not-for-profit groups or different organizations, different levels of government or Indigenous nations in the Vancouver area, how we can work together to catalyze action and support a common interest. And so that's something that we're going to be really focused on. It's not just about the technical, but also about the people and about the relationships and how we work together. So in terms of the outcomes that we're expecting, so we expect to be able to develop systems that will help us better adapt to intense rainstorms as well as drought. And again, I mentioned that evaporation is a very, very powerful tool for addressing urban heat issues, which is a very significant public health issue in Vancouver today, and it's only going to be getting more challenging in the future, and Vancouver Coastal Health is well aware of it. So the more we can find strategies through our rainwater management and green infrastructure systems to help reduce heat stress in the city, the better. Obviously, I mentioned that we have a big priority around addressing combined sewer overflows and addressing the other water pollutants from stormwater, and thinking about how we not only reduce our impacts on the natural systems, which has been sort of a way of thinking for a long time, but to think about how do we make investments now in water infrastructure that actually enhance biodiversity, enhance habitat, and create ecosystem services, health, and well-being in our city. So how we use these as a leverage point to meet that objective. And then finally, thinking about how we support green jobs and strengthen social ties. I referred before about equity and this idea of intersectionality, and thinking about how different inequities, whether they're historic or about different groups within Vancouver or different people that have certain challenges or barriers that we may have been less sensitive to or understanding of in the past, that how can we actually use our delivery of green rainwater infrastructure to help reduce the challenges and help give benefits and outcomes that are positive, meaningful, and desirable for different communities in Vancouver. So we can use it, we can think about how we prioritize placement and types of GRI. I know there's been a lot of research out there that complaint-based systems tend to favor people that are more enfranchised and maybe more willing to advocate for their needs to government agencies. That isn't always necessarily reflecting the people who are most impacted by different conditions. And so when we think about flooding and vulnerability around our housing supply and basement suites, for example, really protecting those and trying to address flooding risks and vulnerabilities, especially to our more vulnerable populations, is important. Thinking about how we build, so we see green rainwater infrastructure as a really significant opportunity for not only creating new economic opportunities for people, but actually more accessible employment. So green infrastructure tends to have lower capital cost up front, but more ongoing operations and maintenance costs. So over its whole life cycle, it may still be very cost effective to deliver, but it does mean a shift in how and where we're spending money. And so in terms of generating economic opportunity and employment, that we can develop training programs for people to access who may have challenges accessing employment or create new opportunities for people that may have barriers to employment. We think there's a tremendous opportunity, and there's been great success on that in many communities across North America, so we're excited about that. And then finally, I think something that we really heard from our community and our expert panel is how do we use the green rainwater infrastructure to help generate greater awareness and understanding within our community about natural systems and the water cycle and the value of nature in the city, and use it as education, capacity building, and community cohesion and community building opportunities. So we think there's a great opportunity to support a more equitable water future through that. In terms of our targets, so our council back in 2016, and actually give credit to Andrew Ling because he was the engineer that was leading this piece of work, and he did a wonderful job with our integrated rainwater management plan. And it has a target that was adopted by council to capture and clean 90% of Vancouver's average annual rainfall. So this sounds really ambitious and challenging, and it is certainly going to be a concerted and dedicated effort over many, many years to achieve this. That translates to a design standard which is meaningful for the engineers that have to do the design work on the water management side, but it's less relatable sometimes for other folks. But basically our current plan, or our previous integrated rainwater management plan, indicated that we should manage 24 millimeters of rainfall volume per day, and that we should clean 48 millimeters. And through our work on the Rain City strategy and doing a lot of scenario development and testing of outcomes and deployment scenarios for green infrastructure, we realized that actually the volume, we need to manage a greater volume of rainwater. And we also realized that we need to go beyond opportunistic application of green rainwater infrastructure as part of new development, and actually have strategic retrofits throughout the city. So I think Andrew referred to that in his presentation, that it's not enough just to say we're going to, as we do new projects, we're going to include rainwater management in the new construction. That's absolutely critical, but it's not enough. We actually need to go back and retrofit both our public and private spaces to address water management. And so with the Rain City strategy, we've actually adopted a new design standard that is capturing 48 millimeters of volume, and we're preserving the clean 48 millimeters. So in our public spaces and our park and in our own civic facilities, we've committed to achieve the 48 millimeters per day in our existing designs, and we've been doing that for the past couple of years in the public realm, and it's been working really well. It'll be more challenging with the private realm. There's quite a bit of work to work with the development community on what are some scenarios, how could you achieve that. It's relatively easy to do on low density single family type developments where they have the ability to infiltrate. It does become more challenging where there's underground parkades and zero lot line type developments, and so they need a different suite of tools, and there's going to be quite a bit of work for us in the coming 3 years to develop the plan and proposals and guidance and materials with our industries and academia and other sectors to help support successful implementation. So as I mentioned, our goal is to really transition from having green infrastructure or green rainwater infrastructure as a one-off type initiative. Like, we've been doing it actually for about 20 years, so we've got some really great precedents and great examples of how we've applied it, even in the Olympic Village, for example. Like, there's green infrastructure throughout, from 50% green roofs to an engineered wetland in Henge Park to bioswales handling 1/3 of the stormwater from the street network So we've got some really terrific examples. What was challenging is that we failed to make the leap from, really great pilots, demonstrations, or improvements on maybe pilots that didn't work so well into a new mainstream practice, and that's what we're striving to do now. So our intention is that green rainwater infrastructure is now a standard part of our water infrastructure services delivery, and we are looking at basically how we integrate it in all of our renewal redevelopment projects, as well as how we use it for strategic retrofits. We are thinking well beyond just small localized rain gardens that serve a relatively small volume. We are looking at more significant district scale and very intensive forms of green infrastructure that can actually manage much greater and much more intense and large volume rain events. So we're really transitioning how that is integrated into business as usual within the organization. Today, while just less than 1% of our impervious areas are actually managed by green rainwater infrastructure, so we have a really, really long way to go, but we're ambitious and we're excited about it, and we believe there's a great potential for it to be a really cost-effective part of a future gray-green integrated system approach. And so we're striving that by 2050, 40% of all impervious areas in the city and public and private property are using green rainwater infrastructure as part of the goal. And so in terms of how we think that, or what that will yield, we expect that it would yield just about 30 billion liters of water treated and diverted from the pipe system every year. Our combined sewer overflow volumes are quite substantial in the Vancouver area, and so it's not something that we believe will be addressed by green infrastructure alone, but we do believe it has a really important role to play, and it's an investment that yields co-benefits for a whole broad range of objectives. And so based on our projections, right now we're estimating that about 1/3 of the current CSO volume would be addressed through green infrastructure, and we need to look at a whole range of grey infrastructure tools that'll be a broad combination of initiatives to help address the whole issue. Okay, so in terms of the polling question, I had one before about CSO cities, and I know in Metro Vancouver there's only 3 cities that have combined sewers, and so it's not an issue that's always as relevant to everyone, but I was just curious of the audience that's part of the group here, how many other cities are dealing with combined sewer overflow challenges, and so I wondered if we could put that polling question up.
Okay, for sure. I've got that one up right now. All right, so the results for that were 39% yes, 18% no, and 42% do not know.
Okay, great. I guess the one thing I would maybe just share that I've learned through the work in the past couple of years is the evolution and the use of green rainwater infrastructure has really been heavily prompted by cities that have significant combined sewer overflow issues. And one of the reasons that it's been most widely applied is they found it's been very, very cost-effective way of delivering services. So just in Portland, for example, they spent 10% of their overall budget for CSO mitigation on green rainwater infrastructure, and they got 35% of the performance outcome. So it's a very, very good sort of value for investment. And then again, they're investments that are not just in pipes that are underground that people don't get to see and experience. It tends to come in forms that people can have many other benefits of having natural systems and healthier trees and better flood management, urban heat mitigation, et cetera, in the community. And so this is why it's really gained in popularity in addressing CSOs. Okay, and then my final polling question, I was just curious for different cities, and of course different cities have different annual rainfall, and so how much water they manage differs, but I was just curious of the people that are part of the call, how much rainwater are your communities currently aiming to manage? I mentioned that Vancouver's new standard now, design standard through the Rain City strategy, is to manage 48 millimeters per day, and I was just curious about where other people are at. Are some people below that, around that, above that, or perhaps maybe aren't there yet of having a design standard that they're applying?
So the results for that one were 5% for 0 to 24 millimeters, 15 for 25 to 48, 3% for more than 48 millimeters, and 13% no target, 61% do not know. And Melina, just a quick time check. It would be great to get started.
I think we're all done, actually.
3 minutes. Okay, great.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. We still have, if you want to wrap up.
Well, just to say that we've been doing this for a long time. We've got a lot of examples, but there's like a lot of work to go on learning how to execute successfully. And like I said, it's been a team effort to look at the practical ways of trying to implement. So we're really keen to learn from other cities and to collaborate and share resources, share learnings, and best findings. So if there's people that are on the call that are part of groups or organizations that are trying to do something similar, we're really happy to share and collaborate and also learn from you as well, so that we can all be more successful in implementing programs. And here's just a few examples, from a major permeable pavement program to resilient roofs, which is going to look at blue-green roof application, to district scale and building scale rainwater harvesting programs, and blue-green systems, which is a really intensified version of rainwater infrastructure that's looking at managing water from a broad area on selected corridors and in selected public spaces. So that's all. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Melina. Great presentation from both you and Andrew. And I do have a number of questions that have come up. So I'll just alternate between yourself, Melina, and Andrew for the questions. So first one's for Andrew. Using the projections that you have, how much of it guides your planning in real time? How do you adjust your finance contingencies to accommodate this planning?
That's a good question. The thing about the way Metro Vancouver is structured is we don't directly design a lot of drainage infrastructure currently. So, I mean, we have a lot of drainage infrastructure. So I would say really right now that's a policy under development in terms of the effect of the sort of the projected IDF curves on how they affect our capital planning and our costs. So, you know, long story short, we're trying to figure that out. In some cases where we have designed some parts of drainage infrastructure, we've just generally undertaken a sensitivity analysis and looked at the effect of the projected IDF curves and made some decisions over whether we would accommodate that increased cost or increased risk of possibly not doing it. So I would, for instance, there's a particular instance where the current site is extraordinarily constrained, and opportunities to upgrade it in 30 or 40 years are extremely limited. So we went ahead and made a decision to accommodate for climate change using some of our projections, but I don't think that would always be the case.
Great, thank you. So Melina, you touched on this a bit, but I'm wondering if you could expand on how you're going to measure progress and achievement against objectives, what the monitoring and valuation plan will be.
Great question. So one of our kind of core indicators that we're going to be using is about the impervious area managed. And so whether that's on private property or public property. So what we've been trying to do, kind of related to what the previous question was, so we've got a plan for the next 4 years to integrate green rainwater infrastructure into our existing capital projects. And so what that means is we partner with like our streets or our transportation initiative. We've got some sewer projects that we're doing where it makes sense to integrate the rainwater management. Or park development, for example, or public space improvement. So we're actually integrating that as we go. And so we're actually, everything's highly engineered, even though you're using natural systems. And so we're actually measuring drainage catchment areas for all of those projects. On the private realm, we have got current applied policy that applies to all major rezoning sites in the city, as well as all townhouse and more dense properties within, it's called the Canby Corridor area, which is quite a large area. It's about 10% of the city. And we want to develop plans to basically roll that out more broadly. But we have over 1,000 developments in the city every year, so it's quite an initiative to make sure that we have a seamless way of implementing that over time. So we've just started monitoring the types of interventions that are being proposed and delivered in the private realm to meet our requirements. In the public realm, we are measuring the estimated volume of water diverted, the impervious area managed, and the volume of water treated per project. The 6 objectives that we have identified include water diverted from the pipe system, total impervious area managed, green areas. So we're also tracking how many of our green infrastructure assets have a green expression, because not all of them have a green expression. Some of them could be subsurface and you don't see them. And then we're measuring water harvest and reuse, because that's a big goal for us around resilience and planning ahead and supporting reduced water, potable water consumption. And so we're actually tracking those metrics. Right now, we feel like it's a relatively modest group of metrics, but we will be expanding that in the future. So, for example, working with our peers in the Parks Board who are looking at urban canopy measurements, we do plan to integrate more with them on that. Urban heat is a very significant issue. It is one of our 6 core objectives for the Rain City strategy, and so we'll want to be doing regular monitoring and evaluation of urban heat challenges across the city. And if we know that we're in an urban heat challenged area, we will want to choose green infrastructure interventions that are more effective at dealing with urban heat. So some of the subsurface solutions that may not be have a green expression, we actually might not go with those in an area that has a big urban heat problem. We might choose to do things like a stormwater tree trench or bioretention, or something that allows for a lot more evaporation of water and something that allows for more cooling and shade and less absorption of heat from concrete, etc. So yeah, those are some of the pieces that we've got going so far, and we do track all of our designs in terms of what each project will deliver. And I'm sure it'll expand from there, but that's where we're at now.
Great, thank you so much. Andrew, is there an increase in the green stormwater infrastructure or general green infrastructure throughout Metro Vancouver, or is it still seen as something that's just nice to do but is being primarily led by the City of Vancouver, North Vancouver, and New West?
Could you repeat the first part of that question, please?
Definitely, yes, it is long. Is there an increase in the green stormwater infrastructure or green infrastructure throughout Metro Vancouver in general, or is it just based in certain areas?
I would say that every Metro Vancouver municipality is increasing their amount of green infrastructure and rainwater management facilities overall. Like what we see, I mean, as like I said in my presentation, Metro Vancouver doesn't have direct jurisdiction over rainwater management for the most part in Metro Vancouver. So, I mean, we facilitate coordination between municipalities through various working groups and the Stormwater Interagency Liaison Group. But what I see as someone with my ear to the ground, I see deployment of rainwater infrastructure is becoming more and more common everywhere in Metro Vancouver. And through the liquid waste management plan and the requirement to do integrated stormwater management plans for all the municipalities, I see that continuing to increase. And I think that Vancouver, having completed the rainwater management plan a couple of years ago, is moving forward strongly in doing their part for the region, or in the region.
Great, good to hear. Quick question. I think we have time for about 2 more questions before 10:45. Are you both okay with sharing these PowerPoints to attendees afterwards?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, we've had a few questions about that. So I think we have time for 2 more questions. Melina, has the city considered implementing any incentive programs for commercial businesses to adopt green rainwater infrastructure within their facilities or on their property?
Yeah, we're definitely interested in looking at how we can incentivize. I think we're trying to learn a lot from what we've done on our green building programs in the past, that at some point we need everybody to be doing their part to manage rainwater. So it's not just about incentivizing sort of the baseline, but we want to incentivize the early adopters. We want to incentivize the people that are trying to be innovative and doing new things where maybe there's a bit more risk or there's a need to learn or develop industry or experience or capacity, that there's a really high value proposition to provide incentives for that. And then from that, we can learn what's working well and try to help normalize it so that it becomes just a standard way of doing business. So we're definitely looking at that. We're not right now looking at basically incentivizing everybody to do it, but we want to incentivize, like I said, the early adopters, the people who want to try to develop new and creative strategies, and the incentives would help them do that or help create case studies or lessons learned that would help inform and shape up policy, regulation, and successful implementation more broadly. So we'll be doing quite a bit of engagement with industry over the coming 2 years. And so through that, we can better understand what people perceive the needs to be and then think about how an incentive program could play a role.
Amazing, thank you. Andrew, one last question for yourself. What's the best way to use these projected IDF curves for projects in BC that are outside of the Metro Vancouver zones?
What's the best way to use the projections outside of the Metro Vancouver zone?
Yes.
I think that I would use the study and the report, which is available online, by the way, if you want to take a look through the methodology and you know, the details, that they're only very specifically applicable inside Metro Vancouver and the rainfall zones that I showed in one of my slides. The data that were used to produce those curves are just based on rain gauges throughout Metro Vancouver. So I would hesitate to directly apply those curves outside the region. But as far as how you would use the study, I mean, it's a template for how you might do your own study based on your own rainfall, as well as maybe provide an indication of what scope of change is possible. But other than a direct application is not something I would suggest.
Great. Well, we're at 10:44, so I will wrap us up. Thank you so much, both of you, for these wonderful and very informative presentations. I learned a lot, and I really appreciate you both taking the time to do this. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone, and thank you to the roughly 150 attendees who joined us.
Great. Thank you very much.